The smell of warm laminate when you open the door. The canvas annex flapping in a lake's entrance summer wind, the lightning flash painted down the aluminium sidewall. The wraparound corner window framing your dad's Holden tow bar. If you grew up in Australia between 1965 and 1985, your family owned a Viscount Caravan, or you spent a Christmas inside one belonging to your uncle. Today, the factory that built them is a Harvey Norman in Liverpool. The road built across the old factory floor is named Viscount Place. You can park your car on it. At its peak in 1978, 3 of every 4 caravans sold in Australia rolled off one production line at Orange Grove Road. How did Australia's #1 caravan empire become a shopping car park? This is the story of a 10 Pound Pom, a gold Maserati, and the men who left the workers with nothing. Chapter 1. The 10 Pound Pom. In the middle of the 1950s, a British carpenter named John Carr boarded a ship at Southampton with £10 in his pocket and a wife 19 years old. His name was John. Hers was Maureen. The Chifley government had thrown the doors of Australia open in 1945 under a slogan that fits on a bumper sticker, "Populate or perish." The Minister for Immigration, Arthur Calwell, had cut a deal with the British government. £10 bought you a one-way ticket. Children went free. The only condition was that you stay 2 years. Over 1 million Britons took the offer. Most never went home. The cars landed in Adelaide. The sources vary on whether it was 1954, 1955 or 1956. The interview Maureen later gave to Time to Roam magazine says 1956. He was 24. She was 19. Their first home in Australia was a drafty former army barracks reached, she told the magazine, on the back of a cattle truck. Imagine that. You are 19 years old. You have just sailed halfway around the world, and the welcoming committee is the back of a cattle truck rumbling down a red dirt road outside Adelaide. Here is the part of the John Carr story that nobody talks about. The man who built Australia's largest caravan empire could barely read. His handwriting was so poor he often asked me to complete documents for him, Maureen would later say. She would also reveal that her husband had suffered from mild autism, a fact the couple hid from their own children. But what Carr lacked in literacy, he made up for somewhere else. Put a spreadsheet in front of him, and he could tally up the columns with ease. His maths brain was relentless. His handshake was binding. He started by building caravans for a man named Hardy, then for himself, out of a milking shed on an Adelaide dairy farm. He and Maureen built 2 vans. The first they kept and lived in because their daughter Jackie was on the way and they needed somewhere to sleep. The second, Maureen sold to a passing farmer at the Royal Adelaide Show. She named it after the Vickers Viscount airliner, the 4-engine British plane that was, in the 1950s, the most modern thing in the sky. The deal happened in the dirt of a showground. The contract was a handshake. The buyer drove the van away that afternoon. There is a customer still alive in Australia today named Don Hooper. He holds a yellowed receipt for a Viscount Caravan he bought new in 1960. The price written on it is £880. A fortune was being built. Nobody yet knew on whose back. Chapter 2. From Milking Shed to Lightning Flash. The first proper Viscount factory opened at 395 Glen Osmond Road in the Adelaide suburb of Fullerton. A second site followed near Virginia, north of Adelaide, where Carr partnered with a tradesman named Bob Hill. Hill was the better engineer of the two. He was reluctant to leave South Australia. When Carr's restlessness pulled the business east, Hill stayed behind and kept building Viscount vans under his own arrangement out of Virginia. Carr moved to Sydney. He set up in Cabramatta on the Hume Highway, in what one forum poster describes as a former horse stable. Cabramatta in those days was a working-class outer suburb full of post-war migrants, Polish, Italian, Hungarian, and later Vietnamese. The carpenter's car needed were already there. They had crossed oceans to build a life, and they were prepared to work piecework rates for a boss who paid in cash. The first model that made the brand was the Valiant, which Viscount built from 1962 to 1975. The Ambassador followed in 1964. And in 1965, somewhere between the Cabramatta and the new Liverpool factories, a designer drew a single jagged line down the aluminium sidewall, a streak of paint that ran from the front corner to the rear wheel arch. The lightning flash. Here is the thing about that lightning flash. It became the visual fingerprint of the Australian Caravan. You drove behind one on the Hume Highway in 1972 and you knew, without reading a single badge, exactly what was being towed. The cult restoration community of 2026 still calls it the most recognisable design feature in the history of Australian caravanning. The sidewalls were branded Duralvans, aluminium panels riveted over a timber frame. Early Viscounts could be ordered with either timber or alloy skin, but by the mid-1960s, the alloy had won. Then came the corner window, curved, wraparound, framed in chrome, designed so that a kid lying on the back bunk could see the whole sky as the van rolled north toward Coffs Harbour or south toward Lakes Entrance. You can buy a homewares range in 2026 inspired by exactly that window. Van Gogh Collections in Victoria has chosen the 1968 Ambassador and the 1978 Supreme Pop Top as the two signature vans of the brand. By the middle of 1965, the Cabramatta sheds were bursting. Carr told Maureen one Saturday that he had found land at Liverpool. The market gardeners on the site, she remembered, did not want to sell. He just convinced them it was time to move on. That was JC. He could not write a contract, but he could persuade a stranger to give up his land in a single conversation. Within 12 months, that paddock at Orange Grove Road would be famed across the industry as the biggest manufacturing complex of its type in the entire Southern Hemisphere. Chapter 3. The biggest complex in the Southern Hemisphere. The Liverpool factory at Orange Grove Road opened in July 1965. The reputation it would carry for the next 20 years, that it was the biggest manufacturing complex of its type in the Southern Hemisphere, is a claim repeated in every restoration article, every forum post, every interview about the brand. Whether the title was ever audited is another question. What is documented is what came off the line. Day one of the new factory, a young accountant walked through the gate. His name was Gary Dunn. He had been hired straight out of a Sydney firm to keep Carr's books. He was sharp with numbers, quiet in meetings, and patient with a boss who could not always read the contracts he was signing. Dunn would still be there 21 years later, on the day the empire was sold. Remember his name. He is the man whose career bookends this entire story. The factory ran on migrant labour, Polish carpenters who had survived the war, Italian fitters whose English was still patchy, Lebanese welders who arrived in the late 1960s, Vietnamese workers who would arrive in the next wave from 1975. They worked piecework. They built 50 vans a day at the peak. By 1970, the Viscount records show 5,000 vans built in a single year out of that one Liverpool plant. 5,000. That is one finished caravan rolling out the gate every 90 minutes of every working day for an entire year. Children of the workers grew up inside the gates. A forum member who posts as Corey remembers it directly. We lived up above the spares department. His father worked the spares counter. His mother worked the canteen. The Liverpool factory was not just a workplace. For dozens of migrant families, it was a small suburb with a payslip attached. Here is the dark side. The Liverpool summer hits 40 degrees in February. There was no air conditioning on the production line. The aluminium panels were riveted by hand. The fiberglass dust hung in the air. A foreman named On Time to Rome by his daughter, Kerry Walden, worked Orange Grove Road as a carpenter and foreman for many years. "Thank you for the memories," she wrote underneath the article. What the memory did not say was what the heat felt like. The boss did not stand on the line. By 1968, Carr was driving a gold Jensen Interceptor into work. A few years later, it was a gold Maserati. The workers nicknamed him JC. Short for Jesus Christ, they joked. He would arrive at the factory, smoke a cigar in the car park, walk the floor for 10 minutes and disappear again. The workforce that built 3 out of every 4 caravans sold in Australia were not the ones driving the Maserati out of the car park. By the early 1970s, Dunn was running the factory day to day. Carr was running the world. 2 more factories opened, Dandenong in Victoria, Landsvale in Sydney's southwest. And then the petrol stopped flowing. Chapter 4. JC and the Gold Maserati. The gold Maserati was always parked in the same spot, the first row of the Orange Grove car park near the office door, alongside the Jensen Interceptor when Carr was using 2 car cars in the same week. A forum member named Darryl, whose family worked the Liverpool floor, remembers JC arriving with a lit cigar in his mouth. "A friendly and smiling fellow," Darryl wrote. He was being generous. The workers earning piecework rates in the shed had other words for the bloke who drove gold cars to a 40-degree shop floor. Maureen ran the household. She also ran the books. She sewed the curtains for the early vans. She raised 4 daughters and a son. Their daughter Jackie later told Time to Rome she had spent the first 8 months of her life living in the back of the family car, because her parents were constantly on the road, making sales calls to country dealers in Wagga, Mildura, Mount Gambier, Cairns. The man who could barely write his own name was building an empire by handshake. In the middle of the 1970s, Gary Dunn was promoted to Managing Director of Viscount Industries. The official company name in some legal documents was Vicar Industries, a portmanteau of Viscount and Carr. Dunn ran the company through what one former executive called its final glory years, while Carr lived the life of a global playboy. The phrase is not mine, it is Time to Rome's, citing Dunn directly. Carr travelled. He flew to Sweden and walked the floor of an IKEA factory and came back convinced that flat-pack furniture was the next caravan. He converted the Landsvale plant to build it. He opened a nightclub on the Gold Coast. The name and exact location are not recorded in any source I could find, and ran it while the caravan empire kept printing money in Liverpool. By 1976, the company was running newspaper advertisements inviting the public to come and tour the Liverpool factory in person. Come to the Viscount Caravan Factory, Orange Grove Road, Liverpool. Walk through the factory, see how these quality caravans are built. The ads ran in the Sydney Morning Herald on weekend editions. People came in their thousands. Dunn's verdict on why the company succeeded was not romantic. It was largely due to being close to the major dealers at the time and quickly adopting new innovations. Translation: JC was good with people and Dunn was good with the spreadsheet. Between them, they owned the market. By 1978, 3 of every 4 caravans and campers sold in Australia rolled off one of Carr's lines. But while the Maserati was being polished in the Liverpool car park, in a town in New South Wales called Mortlake, an old rival was about to fall and the world was about to run out of petrol. Chapter 5. 3 out of every 4. In 1947, a man named Jim Darlington had started a small caravan business in Mortlake, a suburb of Sydney. He passed it to his son John in the mid-1950s. John's wife June revolutionised the interiors with coordinated curtains and colour schemes, fabrics that matched, doors that didn't bang, finishes that looked like a real home. They named the brand Millard after John's middle name Millard with a small spelling tweak. By the late 1970s, Millard was Viscount's only serious rival. The general manager, Gary Burnham, told Time to Roam years later that on one 24-hour shift at the Smithfield plant, Millard built 74 caravans in a single day. The Australian industry's Big Five, Viscount, Millard, Franklin, Chesney and Coronet, were each making over 100 vans a week. Viscount and Millard alone hit 50 vans a day at the peak. This is what the numbers mean in human terms. If you grew up in suburban Melbourne in the 1970s, your parents had a Holden Kingswood with a tow bar bolted to the chassis. Behind that Kingswood, on every Boxing Day, there was a caravan. That caravan was almost certainly built within 50 kilometres of where you slept. The Holden was built in Elizabeth, South Australia. The Viscount was built in Liverpool, New South Wales. Lakes Entrance, Phillip Island, Merimbula, the Coorong, Currumbin. For 2 decades, the Australian middle-class summer ran on Holden petrol and Viscount aluminium, and it ran on migrant labour. By 1978, the Liverpool floor was a roll call of post-war Europe: Polish foremen, Italian cabinet makers, Yugoslav fitters. By the early 1980s, a wave of Vietnamese workers arrived in Cabramatta and walked straight into the same sheds their predecessors had built. The piecework rate was the same, the summer heat was the same, the lightning flash on the sidewall was the same. 3 out of every 4 caravans sold in Australia in 1978 came out of one industrial complex. It is the equivalent number that Holden held in the Australian car market in the same decade. It is the equivalent number that Peters held in the Australian ice cream freezer. For one moment in 1978, Viscount stood with Holden and Peters as the holy trinity of Australian summer. Here is the kicker. The day the merger with Millard went through in 1979, the federal government had to review the deal because Viscount had become too dominant a buyer in its own market. Carr was forced to formally satisfy regulators that the takeover would not damage competition. The government approved it. The Darlington family, hurt by a Sydney hailstorm that wrecked hundreds of vans in their yard, plus the collapse of the towing market, had no choice but to sell. John Carr swooped in and bought them at the bottom. Within 6 months, the entire towing market would collapse, out from under him as well. Chapter 6: The Petrol Pump Wars. On the 16th of October, 1973, the Organisation of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries declared an oil embargo against the United States and its allies. According to the Federal Reserve Bank's own history, the price of a barrel of oil rose from $2.90 before the embargo to $11.65 by January 1974. A quadrupling in roughly 5 months. In Australia, the effect was immediate. Petrol pumps ran dry, service stations rationed sales. The middle-class family that had bought a caravan in 1972 to spend Christmas at Lakes Entrance was suddenly looking at a fuel bill that doubled before the trip began. And then, on the night of the 18th of July 1973 at 7 o'clock, the freshly elected Whitlam government did something nobody outside the Treasury had seen coming. Prime Minister Gough Whitlam announced that all Australian tariffs would be cut by 25%. Across the board, from midnight, live on national television. The Conversation, in a 2023 piece marking the 50th anniversary, called it the single decision that changed Australia's economy forever. This is the same tariff cut this channel has explored before, the decision that killed the Howard Rotavata factory in Northmead, the decision that killed the Bradmill Denim Mill in Yarraville. The wall was about to fall on his factory floor. Then came 1979. A second oil shock, this one triggered by the Iranian Revolution. And worse, an industrial dispute at the Caltex refinery in Cornell, New South Wales. The University of New South Wales has the historical record. Associate Professor David Lee notes that 1979 was the year Australia introduced petrol rationing for the last time, using an odd-even number plate system at the pumps. Even-numbered plates on one day, odd-numbered plates on the next. Queues stretched around the block at every petrol station from Cairns to Hobart. Gary Burnham at Millard summed up what happened next in a single sentence. The caravan market dropped out from underneath Millard almost overnight. Australians were in no mood to buy big cars and tow caravans. He was talking about Millard. He could have been talking about every caravan factory in the country. Some industry voices, including Bruce Binns at Avida, have argued that what actually killed the caravan boom was cheap international air travel through the 1980s, not petrol. That argument deserves to stand in the record. What is not contested is that 1979 was the year the volume halved. Carr did not respond by simplifying the product. He tried to make a more luxurious one. He called it the Aerolite. It was about to become the worst decision he ever signed off on. Chapter 7. The Aerolite Disaster. In the middle of the 1980s, Carr launched a new range of caravans inspired, he said, by what he had seen in Europe. The brand name was Aerolite. The vans were lighter, curvier, sleeker. On paper, they were beautiful. On the dealer floor, they were a disaster. The vans leaked. The aluminium skin pulled away from the frame. The early units came back to dealers for warranty work within months of being towed off the lot. A man named Ray McCoy, who at the time was the National Sales and Marketing Manager for Vicar Industries, would put it on the record decades later. The Aerolite, he wrote, tarnished the brand. He called it a major PR disaster that occurred prior to John Carr selling out in 1986. Read that again. The senior marketing executive of the company is on the record saying that the founder's last product launch was a major PR disaster which preceded his exit. Inside the Liverpool factory, the workforce knew. The carpenters and welders who had been building Viscounts for 15 years were now being asked to throw together a product whose engineering they did not trust. The piecework rate stayed the same. The complaint sheets at the dealer level grew thicker every quarter. The line that had built 5,000 bulletproof Valiants in 1970 was now patching together vans whose own designer had not solved the basic problem of a watertight seal. Gary Dunn watched it from the office. The accountant, who had walked through the gate on day one in 1965, was now managing director of a company whose founder was distracted, whose new product was failing, and whose gold Maserati was being seen less and less often in the Orange Grove car park. Carr was on the Gold Coast running a nightclub. Carr was in Sweden walking through IKEA. Carr was in his global playboy phase, and the empire was paying for it. A caravan is a trust product. A family buys one once in their lifetime. If the first one leaks, that family does not buy a second one. That family tells 5 other families. By 1985, the word on Aerolite had spread through every dealership in New South Wales and into Queensland and Victoria. The dealer in Wagga, who had moved 15 Viscounts a year through the 1970s, was now moving 3. Across town in Smithfield, Millard was already inside the Viscount empire after the 1979 merger. Both brands now wore the same problem. The dealers who had stocked Viscount for 20 years were starting to ask whether the company was still worth backing. In 1986, Carr made a decision. He told Maureen, he told Dunn, he told the lawyers. He was getting out. The signature he could barely produce in his own handwriting went onto the sale papers, and the empire he had built from a milking shed was sold to a buyer whose plans he never bothered to investigate. The gold Maserati left the Orange Grove car park for the last time. Chapter 8. The Day JC Walked Away. In 1986, John Carr sold Viscount. The exact buyer in that first transaction has never been cleanly named in any single source. What is documented is what happened next. Time to Rome reports that after the sale, the brand passed through a couple of ownership changes before settling, by the late 1990s, with the Gazal family in Western Sydney. The Millard brand went with it. Ray McCoy's verdict, on the moment, is the one that survives. Let the name Viscount rest in peace with its original owner and founder, John Carr. It is an unusual public statement from a former executive of any company. It reads almost like an obituary written for a brand the writer believed should have been buried with its founder. Carr did not retire to a quiet life on the coast. According to a former casual employee who posted on Time to Rome, the founder ended up in Brisbane, sitting in front of a Reuters terminal trading stocks. The gold Maserati does not appear in any Brisbane photograph. It is gone from the record. JC, by 2017, had died. The exact date of his death was not published in any obituary I could locate. His widow Maureen survived him, the man who could not write his own contracts, who arrived at 24 with £10, who built an empire that touched every Australian summer for 2 decades, slipped quietly out of the record without a public funeral notice. Inside the Liverpool factory, the change at the top was felt within weeks. Gary Dunn, the bright young accountant of 1965, the steady managing director through the glory years, had spent 2 decades building a relationship of trust with Carr. The new owners did not know him. He did not know them. The carpenters and welders on the line saw a different car park, different suits walking the floor, different signatures on the wages dockets. For a few years, the production line kept running, vans kept rolling out, the lightning flash kept being painted on the sidewall. To the customer browsing the Sydney Morning Herald classifieds in 1989, Viscount still looked like Viscount. Inside the building, it was not the same. The marketing team McCoy had run was reshaped. The product range was rationalised. Dealers reported delays. Warranty claims went unpaid for longer. The company that had taken 3 out of every 4 sales in 1978 was, by the early 1990s, a brand passing quietly between corporate owners, with no plan beyond extracting whatever cash flow remained. Carr's exit in 1986 was not the death of Viscount, it was the door. It was the moment the company stopped being a family business and became a corporate asset. Once that door is open, it cannot be closed again. The next owners would not be content with a quiet decline. They would Phoenix the company. Chapter 9. The Phoenix Companies. On the 31st of January 2007, the New South Wales Fair Trading Minister, Diane Beamer, issued a press release welcoming the action just taken by the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. ASIC had disqualified a Sydney businessman named Nahi Nasri Gazal from managing any corporation. The investigation, the release said, had begun after complaints to New South Wales Fair Trading that defective caravans returned to dealerships for warranty repairs had been resold to other consumers. Read that again. The vans that customers had returned for warranty repairs because they were defective were being resold to other customers. The customer trusted the brand. The brand betrayed the customer twice. Once when the van was defective. Once when the same van was resold under a quietly renamed company to somebody else. ASIC found that Gazal had moved his caravan operations through a chain of Phoenix companies. The numbers in the official records are slightly different between the ASIC summary and the New South Wales Fair Trading press release. ASIC says 6 failed companies. New South Wales Fair Trading says 7. The total owed to creditors was in excess of 13 million Australian dollars. The exact figure cited by New South Wales Fair Trading was $13,048,778. The companies named in the documents are these: Gazal Leisure, Viscount Manufacturing, RV Manufacturing, Vehicle Assembly Australia, Mirage Caravan Manufacturing, Goldstream Caravan Manufacturing, and Gazal Caravans itself. The pattern was a textbook Phoenix operation. One company would fail owing creditors hundreds of thousands. The same operator would open another. The assets would migrate. The debts would not. Suppliers chased invoices into entities that no longer existed. Workers chased their entitlements into shell companies. The cars in the directors' driveways did not change. Two clarifications matter for the record. The Nahi Nasri Gazal, named in the ASIC investigation, is not the same person as the developer Nabil Gazal of the Gazcorp Property Group, who would later build a shopping centre on the same Orange Grove Road. The names are coincidence. No public record establishes a family link. The two stories share a road. They do not share a balance sheet. The workers and the customers shared the bill. Carpenters who had stayed at Viscount for 15, 20, 25 years lost their entitlements when the companies they worked for collapsed. Customers who had bought their first new van after saving for a decade discovered the warranty document in their glove box was attached to a company that no longer existed. ASIC's January 2007 action took Nahi Nasri Gazal out of the director's chair. The action did not return a single dollar to the carpenters. It did not return a single dollar to the customers. It barred him from managing a corporation. It did not jail him. The Viscount empire that Carr had built from a milking shed was, by the middle of the 2000s, a fact pattern in an ASIC investigation file. On the same Orange Grove Road, an entirely different war was about to begin. Chapter 10. Orange Grove. In 2001, the receivers of Viscount put the jigs and fittings of the production line up for sale. Two men in the industry, Gary Willer and the late Stan Edwards, bought them. They did not relaunch Viscount. They went to the Darlington family, got permission, and resurrected Millard. The brand that Viscount had swallowed in 1979 outlived the company that swallowed it. The Liverpool factory itself was now a vacant industrial parcel on the southwestern edge of Sydney. And in the early 2000s, as a property developer named Nabil Gazal, head of a company called Gazcorp, looked at the land and saw a future. This is the second Gazal, not the caravan company Gazal, a different family, a different business, no documented link, but the same street, the same dirt. Gazcorp wanted to build an outlet centre on the old factory site. The land was zoned industrial. The retail use was not strictly permitted, but the centre was built and tenants started to move in, and weekend shoppers from Liverpool and Cabramatta and Fairfield started turning up with cash. The biggest commercial landlord in Australia took notice. Westfield, controlled by Frank Lowy, ran a major Liverpool shopping centre 5 minutes down the road. Westfield went to the Land and Environment Court. On the 16th of January 2004, the court ordered the retail tenants at Orange Grove to close. The number of jobs lost is reported as between 200 and 400, depending on which Westfield critic and which Gazcorp supporter you ask. The New South Wales government of the day was led by Premier Robert John Carr. This is a third Carr. Not John Carr, the Caravan founder. Bob Carr, the Labor Premier. The names are pure coincidence. Bob Carr's government declined to retrospectively rezone the land to save the centre. The political fight that followed ran on talkback radio and in the daily papers for the best part of 2 years. The Independent Commission Against Corruption investigated. In 2005, ICAC found no corruption on the part of any minister. The commission was, however, critical of a Westfield government relations executive named Mark Ryan. ICAC described Ryan's conduct as, at worst, mischievous. The radio host Alan Jones took up the cause of the displaced tenants. He raised it on his program through 2004 and 2005. When the centre was rebuilt and reopened, Jones cut the ribbon himself and described the original closure as a kick in the teeth. Carr, the founder, built the largest caravan empire in the southern hemisphere on this road. Gazal, the caravan phoenix, stripped that empire of its workforce on it. Gazal, the developer, turned the dirt into an outlet centre on it. Carr, the Premier, let the centre close on it. Lowy, the landlord, pushed for that closure on it. IPAC investigated on it. Jones reopened it on it. One road in one suburb of Western Sydney hosted nearly half a century of Australian industrial and political fights. By 2026, only the Harvey Norman would remain. Chapter 11. What Remains. Stand on Orange Grove Road, Liverpool, today, and you would not know a single thing had ever happened here. The factory is gone. The car park where the gold Maserati sat is paved over with a Harvey Norman, a Domain, and a Bing Lee. Across the road, the Fashion Spree outlet mall sells discounted Mimco, Review and Morel stock to a Saturday afternoon crowd of teenagers and young families. A new road built across the old factory floor has been given a name by the local council. The road is called Viscount Place. You can park your car on it. Lesson 1. Greed looks like a gold Maserati until it looks like a Phoenix company. The man who walked away from the Liverpool factory in 1986 was a 10 Pound Pom, who had built 3 out of every 4 caravans sold in this country. He left the workers behind for a Brisbane stockbroker's terminal. He left the brand to a chain of corporate owners who had no intention of building anything. 20 years later, that brand had become a fact pattern in an ASIC file, with 6 or 7 Phoenix companies and $13 million in debts to creditors. The arrogance that drives a founder to a gold Maserati is the same arrogance that lets the next owner walk through a string of shell companies, leaving workers with nothing. They look different. They are the same disease at different stages. Lesson 2. The petrol pump is a political weapon. The Viscount Empire was not killed by a competitor. It was bruised by OPEC in 1973, cracked by Whitlam's tariff cut on the 18th of July 1973, and finally felled by the second oil shock and the Caltex-Kurnell strike in 1979. Every one of those decisions was made in a room thousands of kilometres from the Liverpool factory floor. The Australian middle-class summer was built on cheap petrol. When the petrol stopped being cheap, the caravan industry stopped existing in the form Carr and Darlington had created. Lesson 3. Workers pay the bill twice. The Liverpool workforce paid the first bill in 1986, when JC took the cheque and the company changed hands without ceremony. They paid the second bill in the 2000s, when their employer ran through 6 or 7 shell companies and their entitlements vanished into a creditor's line. 6 or 7 companies. More than $13 million owed. Not one director jailed. The carpenters and welders who built the lightning flash onto thousands of Australian summer holidays are not remembered on a plaque on Orange Grove Road. The road is named for the product. It is not named for them. The wraparound corner window is now a Harvey Norman shopfront on a road called Viscount Place. The Holden tow bar is gone. The lightning flash is gone. The cigar smoke is gone. Australian families still drive past on the way to somewhere else.